Welcome back to the AI Frontrunners in News series. In this series, we explore how artificial intelligence is not changing the tools of journalism, but reshaping its very architecture. And today, I'm joined by someone who has been thinking about that architecture longer and more deeply than almost anyone in the industry, David Caswell. If you followed the evolution of computational journalism, structured narratives, or the future of the newsroom, you've seen David's fingerprints everywhere. He has worked at the intersection of news, technology, and system design for years at BBC Newsland, at Yahoo, and also now as an independent thinker mapping the next phase of our information ecosystem. Recently, David introduced a concept that has been sparking a lot of reflection and debate across the industry: infinite journalism. It's a provocative idea, and it's actually one of the core topics that we will address together. Welcome, David, to our show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And maybe, David, just to come at the very core of that idea, infinite journalism, what was the kind of the spark or the tension that you felt kind of, and bring that idea alive in the thoughts that you developed?
Well, the thing that I'm focused on almost entirely now is what all of this kind of AI disruption adds up to. So it's not the sort of the practical uses in the newsroom kind of day to day. Although I'll do a little bit of that for some of my consulting clients, but it's more on what is the end state, or what are possible or plausible end states for journalistic information in an AI mediated, like a fully AI mediated information ecosystem. So, a big part of that is trying to understand, the fundamentals or the first principles of what changes in this emerging AI mediated information ecosystem. And one of the things that changes is the assumptions around scarcity or abundance in the other direction, of information, of journalistic information, but of information generally. And you look at you look at news organizations now, or other knowledge producing organizations, and they're largely structured and constructed and operate around assumptions of scarcity. There's only so many reporters in a newsroom. You can only cover so many stories. All of this stuff, and a lot of those assumptions go away for big chunks of knowledge production in an AI mediated information ecosystem, because the tools can read, they can analyze, they can listen, they can translate, they can transcribe, they can interview people, they can do all kinds of things. And so that's kind of where this comes from. There was in that article where that term comes up, there was another concept that paralleled or kind of went with that infinite journalism concept. Before I get to that, I'll just kind of talk about one of the reactions that are quite common to that concept, which is people are mortified or horrified because they're already overwhelmed with information. Right. So people are looking at their apps, and it's just full of stuff they can never read. Their tabs are
overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
It's overwhelming.
And so they think, well, I don't want more content because of I'm already overwhelmed. But we're not talking about content here. We're talking about information. And so there was this second concept that went along with that, infinite journalism, if you like, that was more about how comfortable and empowering information would become, or would likely become, in an AI mediated information ecosystem. In other words, it wouldn't, there's this separation between the information itself and the artifacts, or the kind of the units that communicate that information. And the point I was making there was that we're not overwhelmed by information, especially we're not overwhelmed by relevant, useful, empowering information. The thing that we're overwhelmed by is artifacts. It's articles, it's podcasts, it's videos, it's whatever it is.
Could you call it the noise versus the signals, if you want?
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And what I'm trying to the picture I'm trying to paint in that piece is a world where where, like now you mostly get noise and you're trying to find signal in that noise. But AI gives us this tool to first of all give us vastly more information, and then secondly, to give us access directly to the signal, so that we get this deeply, deeply relevant, dense informational experience,
Okay,
empowering
okay.
informational experience that we don't have now.
Hmm. And when reading your article, and I must say it takes a bit of time to go through that. But one thing that was striking to me is that you say, "Hey, we really, as kind of to for journalism to thrive, we need a very positive view on a possible end game that will spark initiative to getting us there." Could you maybe explain a bit why that is so important to you?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two uh, dimensions, I guess, of the reaction of journalism to AI. So one of them
Hmm.
is along the positive versus negative axis, right? And
Hmm.
so that is very much on the negative side now, for very obvious reasons.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this negativity goes from all the way from how is it going to affect our business model? All our search traffic is going away on the one hand, all the way up to very, very dystopian um, uh, uh, you know plausible
Hmm.
end states, right? So end
Hmm.
states where information chaos and slop
Hmm.
and all this kind of stuff. And so that dimension is there. And then there's another dimension which is around whether incremental or small changes to the existing way of producing societal information or journalism, whether that's enough, or
Hmm.
do you need to just tear the whole thing down to the foundations and build from scratch, right? So this
Hmm.
incrementalism versus transformation, that's another
Transformational.
axis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And my
Okay.
my view is that because of the power of the capabilities that these tools unleash, and because that power is directly focused on the essence of what journalism does, that it's going to be transformational. It's not going to be
Okay.
incremental, right? This
Yeah.
change. But also that if we want the outcome to be good instead of bad, then we have to propose and describe and articulate and build towards the good outcome. We have to first envision it, and then we have to build towards it. So it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
good enough to sit here saying, well, we're going to be transformational, we're going to be kind of fundamentally
Sure.
disrupting how we do things, without having a positive vision for what we want on the other end of this,
Yeah.
so that we can build
Okay.
towards that vision. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to get to in that piece.
Yeah. And if I read that piece, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a kind of a key point that you make is that we all can have a better life as people, as humans, if we are essentially better informed on a much more personal basis and on a much broader variety of topics. That's the first kind of hypothesis in there,
Yep.
that we live better lives. And I don't think a lot of people will question that if that information is there on the right time, in the right way, delivered on a personal note. The second part of the equation is then, okay, the information creation part. Because you have on the one hand the reception part, and then you have the creation part, and then you have the transmission. You can discuss about the three parts of that part. Um, how do you see the creation part? And there is to a degree also a vision that you have. The AI agents will also be, let's say, helping to create specific pieces of information relevant to humans. Is that your viewpoint?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is already happening in many newsrooms. So like a more pragmatic term for this is AI news gathering, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so there are AI news gathering um, projects and even products that are operating in multiple newsrooms. It's still
Okay.
not a mainstream thing, but quite a few newsrooms are
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
this.
And can
So
you give an example? Can you give an example,
well,
like, and what?
yeah, a prominent example would be Reuters. So Reuters have a tool that they've built called Fact Genie, and
Mhm.
Fact Genie reads press releases. So Reuters gets like thousands and thousands of press releases every day,
Yeah.
and Fact Genie reads all those press releases and finds interesting stories,
Okay.
and it's quite sophisticated in kind of how they've got it set up. So that's a way that they do not have the resources to have people read every single
Mhm.
press release they get, and so now they can do that. Another example in a different domain
Mhm.
is a very small newsroom in northern Norway called I Tromso, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have pipelines there to read like all the PDFs that their local governments produce,
Yeah. Okay.
and understand what's going on in a way that they just wouldn't have enough human reporters
Human
to do.
reporters. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so
It's
these are
interesting.
these kind of AI news gathering projects. What I've observed is news organizations begin one, like say Fact Genie, and then they quickly realize that, well, hang on a second, we could use this to do. We could read all the PDFs, or we could read all the social posts, or we could monitor all the websites, or we could
Yeah.
read all of the scientific literature on the subject, or we could do this, or
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
could do
Yeah.
that,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and it's there's no logical ending point. So the point I'm making with the article is that AI is going to gather basically a lot of our information, and it can do it systematically. It doesn't have to sit there deciding whether this story is newsworthy or that story is
Yeah,
newsworthy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It can
Understood.
cover
But
every
yeah,
single
yeah.
one.
Mhm. And if you think it through, because it's very interesting. If you now look a little bit at the OpenAI's, the large language models, which basically have done probably in batches, gathered all whatever knowledge they could find, or whatever documents, PDF documents from governments to research reports, and put it in big machines. Um, are they not going to take up that role of informing people to their most personal needs, providing them specific access, uh, and and and
Yep.
and is the end game already not out there then today?
So no, I mean, I think in thinking about the foundation model companies, you have to distinguish between training and what we'll call RAG, or retrieval augmented
Yeah,
generation,
or
which
inference. They call it inference. That's,
well,
mhm.
inference is just using the model, but
Yeah,
there's this concept of using the models to read a lot of material, and the
sure.
technical term for that is
Yeah,
retrieval
the rack.
augmented
Yeah.
generation,
Hmm.
the
Yeah,
RAG systems. So the whole training thing is kind of not an issue anymore. That data has already been used to make the
hmm,
models kind of fluent in
yeah,
language. This is all about the RAG side. It's all about the sort of the when you ask ChatGPT about the news that happened an hour ago, do you get a valid
mm,
story, right?
sure.
And so the way they're doing it now is they have these deals that they've signed with all of these publishers,
Yeah,
and that is the what's called the grounding data for their RAG, right? So
yeah.
I think the thing here though is that what that represents is the model companies using secondary, largely there's
Hmm.
generalizations all through here, but they're using secondary sources
Yep.
for those stories, and increasingly I think they're already doing this at scale. They'll use primary sources. So if a news organization is essentially rearranging tokens, which is the technical term for
Yep.
words, right?
Yeah.
If they're taking words from, say, a government PDF and adding words from sort of three or four experts who are
Yeah.
commenting on it, and adding some context and all the rest of it, and putting different words out on the other end, the machines will do that. Like the model companies will probably do that. But
Yeah.
the thing that they won't do is they're not going to create new knowledge that is not accessible to the machines. So they're not going to be going out into the world. They're not going to be developing sort of journalism specific processes like verification, like these kind of
Hmm.
reputation based things that journalism does, right? So two
Yeah.
sources,
Which,
and assessment of the credibility of the sources, and nuance, combining sort of publicly available information and digitally available information with like conversations in the halls of parliament. They're not going to be able to do that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But
yeah,
for stuff that is digitally accessible, they're going to go right to the primary sources because there's just nothing stopping them.
yeah. And building on that idea, where do you see the role for human involvement? I will call it most broadly. And what
Yeah.
kind of skill will a journalistic organization in the future need to be able to be in that value chain from a whatever fact, call it fact, something that is out there, something that has happened, towards the consumption in the most fluid way? Where do you see that?
Well, I think so. I mean, well, I'll talk about the institutions, the organizations, but I think it's important to distinguish between the individual journalists and the institutions that they work for. There's a kind of a different thing
Okay.
going on
Okay.
there. But with the institutions, the core challenge is that they've got this competition coming from one side, from the machines. So the machines are able
Yeah.
to do more and more and more, and go to the primary sources and so on. But on the other side, the humans are coming, and the humans are people like, Substackers and Joe Rogan, or you with your podcast, or any
Individual creators. You call it individual
individual
creators. Yeah.
individual creators, right?
Yeah.
And so that's also this huge block of new
Hmm.
competition, and these people are now AI, that they have superpowers enabled by AI. So, for example, editing a podcast is a lot easier now than it was, say, 3 or 4 years ago because of
Sure.
AI, right? And so, I think for institutions themselves, there's they're going to have to think very, very carefully about what it is that their core value is. They
Hmm.
do have some options, like one option is, which there are some news organizations that have um, plans around this, or strategies, or at least wishes. So one, for example, would be to build and own a significant chunk of the AI infrastructure that collects news, and to apply
Hmm.
editorial processes over that. So instead of OpenAI kind of reading all the PDFs, the news
Hmm.
organization reads all the PDFs, but it applies its
Hmm.
AI according to journalistic principles, and therefore improves the quality and the trustworthiness and the utility of the information, much more than just going to the primary sources and
So could
and
could
and
could you
regurgit.
could we kind of rephrase that? If you think on the current process where most newsrooms deploy anywhere between 100 and let's say 300 reporters, and basically in the future this layer might be replaced by a couple of orchestrators of these kind of AI systems that tap into all the fact generators.
Yeah,
Is that
well,
something that could happen in the future?
possibly what I would call them editors, actually, instead of orchestrators. But it's a little different because they're editing, essentially, and they're not editing text, they're editing systems and processes. So this is more like an abstraction of editorial judgment. So editorial judgment right now is often applied, not always, but often applied article by article by article. Some story
Sure.
breaks, or
Story.
some article
Yeah,
goes out,
yeah.
and the editor is focused on the text of the story, or sort of the details of the story. Whereas in an organization that chose to sort of automate large portions of its workflows, they would abstract the editorial judgment. So your responsibility as an editor then becomes to make sure the machines are are producing verified, high quality, trustable, referenceable, all of these characteristics that make information journalistic, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that's
yeah.
that's one possibility, or one potential response. There's others. Like, another one is to just go up the value chain and offer, high quality, artisanal, handmade information, right? So we see this in the physical goods world. We had an industrial revolution a long
Hmm.
time ago. We
Yeah,
know how
yeah.
to we know how to outsource manufacturing of physical goods to China. We know all this stuff, and yet there's still about a €500 billion a year luxury
Mm.
goods market, which is largely based on handmade goods. And the same thing is true in information, right? I mean, it's very difficult to envision a world where products like The Economist or even the New York Times, where they don't retain a lot of value, because they are
Yeah.
they are high value, informational, handmade goods, basically.
Yeah, yeah,
But
and
but but that
the
but
risks
that's a
a
small.
bit. Let's say a small portion of the market, the happy few having access to that
Exactly.
kind of human curated, and then the broader groups audiences will be served most likely by, as you call, an AI mediated ecosystem. And maybe if I can just focus on one part of AI mediation, because that's another part of your vision, and that is about trust. But before we dive into that, we will just take a very short break to allow for a short announcement to be made, and then we will get back to you soon after the break.
Hi, I'm Sarah, the organizer of the Digital Growth Summit. If you'd like to dive deeper into conversations like this one, join us on October 15th in Leuven, Belgium, for the 9th edition of the Digital Growth Summit. You'll be alongside some of the brightest minds in the media industry as we explore the ideas shaping the future of news. You can learn more at twipemobile.com. That's TWIPE mobile.com. See you on October 15th. And now back to the show.
AI mediated ecosystem. For many people, if we talk about that at Twipe, we actually have been testing conversational news interfaces. The immediate word that kind of is there is trust. How will I trust a conversation with a machine where, let's say, indeed the pieces of, call it information included, are provided by trusted data sources, and still what comes out of, how do I trust that? How do you see that? Is that going to be labeled? Is there just going to be, it's going to be trustworthy enough? How do you see that?
So I think trust is going to be a fundamental value in this emerging ecosystem. But one way to think about trust is not even in human terms. So in this ecosystem that's rapidly emerging, it's very likely that a lot of the quote unquote participants in that ecosystem won't be people. They will be agents. There will be agentic entities, right? And so what happens there is that people don't come to a website or an app to consume journalistic information or even to ChatGPT. They have an agent that consumes information on their behalf, and that agent might have a lot of autonomy. It may have their credit card information, and it's authorized to make purchases and all this kind of stuff, right? And so if you have an agent that is running big chunks of your life, if it is making purchases for you, if it is advising you on who to vote for, if it is organizing your cultural activities, if it's organizing your social life for you, if it's doing all this kind of stuff, you want that agent to have trustworthy information, right? And so a lot of this might be about very technical ideas of trust. Often, the way this is approached in the tech companies is essentially like the kind of 5 Sigma quality control type stuff.
Sure.
And that kind of quality or trustworthiness in information used by agents could become very, very significant. In terms of people, I think there's more going on. I think with people, yes, you do have that. Is the information any good? But I think there's a whole set of other criteria going on, like identity is part of it. The people that I like politically said it, therefore I trust it, or status is a part of it, right? So there's these other aspects to trust when it comes to humans.
And do you see in that context, then, coming back again to professional journalistic organization, the question can be, do they still make a chance in that world? You mentioned already the happy few, the New York Times, the Economist, but do you think that a well-branded, trusted label, call it a news brand, still makes sense in that AI-mediated ecosystem?
I don't think anyone is going to carry on as business as usual in this next few years or decade or so, right? I don't think that's one of the realistic options. But there are a set of strategic possibilities or options available to different organizations, right? So another one, I've talked about the kind of going up the value chain. I've talked about the owning and operating the infrastructure of AI news with journalistic oversight. I think that's a very real one. There are others. Another one is news organizations that primarily become listening organizations rather than speaking organizations, right? So instead of an organization just gathering information and then communicating that to its audience, its purpose becomes understanding and appreciating its audience, and then it as a secondary role, it can serve that audience using these AI tools with the information that they need. So their job becomes knowing what to deliver to the audience. That's the main job. The secondary job is actually delivering that information. That's not going to be something that a lot of organizations can do, but some I think public service, for example, has kind of a special advantage there. There's a few other things going on that some organizations might go that route. But this sort of menu of options, of strategic options, is quite distinctive to the organization, right? It's like, how technical savvy are you? How strong is your culture, and how entrepreneurial is your leadership? All of that kind of stuff is in there.
Playing a role, yeah. And maybe on another maybe finer reflection, Tribe is, as you may know, we kind of have built our business on the, say, growing importance of the e-paper, the digital version of the newspaper. The newspaper is a concept that is 400 years old, and
Yep.
like a structured format, finite format, bringing a kind of a selection of information curated by humans to humans, and also catering for a human need, what we call brief me a couple of times a day, job done.
Yep.
So how, and personally, if what we see is that product is still growing even after 15 years, and so this
Yep.
is remarkable in the world of the TikToks and all of that product is growing. And one of the aspects that people like is the finite experience, job done
Yep.
for the day.
Yep.
How do you see that compatible with your view of infinite journalism? How do you look at that?
Yeah. So just on the e-paper, or even print for that matter, I think there's a couple of things that are kind of working to at least keep that around for a while, and maybe even grow it, right? And so one aspect is just how sticky human habits are, but another one is this sort of decision that a lot of people are making not to embrace technology, or to sort of intentionally kind of de-tech their lives or untech their lives. And I think there's a lot of, you see this in lots of different media, vinyl and so on, right? So that's, I think that's a kind of a separate thing. But I think the bigger thing that you're getting at here, the distinction I would make is between active and passive media, or between lean forward and lean back media, right? So lean back is, I come in at the end of the day, I turn on the big screen in my living room, and I see some experience for 30 minutes, and that's it. Or this is the kind of experience we're all familiar with. And I think there's no barrier at all to AI producing absolutely insanely high quality lean back or passive experience, right? It's like people are, I think, a little conditioned because the early interface to AI is a chatbot that requires you to develop your own curiosity and ask a question. But I think that's just a phase that we're going through. It's like for those of us that are old enough to remember the DOS prompt before there was even graphical user interfaces, it's like that, right? It's a temporary thing. And I think I think having very, very highly produced lean back or passive experiences is just an inevitability.
Okay, great. No, it's an interesting insight, the latter one. That kind of where does it start? Where does it go to? And maybe on a very final question, and maybe also a short answer, for any CEO of a news publishing company today, from your experience, what is, from that concept of infinite journeys, what do I have to do Monday morning to get something started in my company? What do you typically advise?
Well, I usually start by asking a question, and the question is, if by some magic, some government program or whatever it was, just tomorrow you ended up with 20,000 new journalists. So just say you have 200 journalists in your newsroom, and tomorrow, for some miracle, you ended up with 20,000 new journalists. What do you tell them to do? What is your instruction to those journalists? And that's the core of the question. It's a little different, and there are certain things, little nuances here and there, but that's the heart of the question. And it's a little harder than that because you're not the only one that gets 20,000 new journalists. Everybody gets 20,000 new journalists. That makes it a little harder, but still, that's the heart of the challenge.
Yeah, that's the big challenge, to be kind of attacked and understood, and that's where you kind of, with all the insights and your thinking,
well, just to quickly on that as well.
Go ahead.
I think engagement, like I think engaging deeply with the tools, and not just as an organization, but as an individual leader, is fundamental. Like, one of the reasons I think that's super critical is because I don't think you can really understand how capable these models have become and these agentic systems. I don't think you can understand that unless you engage with them on deep, challenging, complex projects. If all you're doing is asking for a summary of an article, well, you're going to get the same result as you got in 2023 with GPT-4. You have to be doing quite advanced things to even be aware of how capable they are. So I think everybody, especially leadership of media organizations, needs to engage very deeply with these things.
Trying to enter. David, thank you for taking us a couple of layers deeper today. Your work has a way of widening the frame, reminding us that the future of news isn't just about adding new tools, but about reimagining the systems beneath them. These ideas around infinite journalism, agent-based models, adaptive news ecosystems give all of us, tech providers, publishers, producers, product teams, newsrooms leaders, plenty to reflect upon. And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us here on the AI Frontrunners in News podcast. If today sparked a new question or challenged an assumption, then the conversation has done its job. Until next time, thank you, David, and hope to see you also in real life, face-to-face in one of the events to come.